Good morning. I would like to call to order the open meeting for Wednesday, August 13th, 2025. I will note that Commissioner Hawkins is joining us virtually today. Hi, and thank you for that, Commissioner Hawkins. And now I will ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, August 8th, 2025, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the minutes. I apologize, it's Thursday, August 7th, 2025.
I move we approve the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, August 7, 2025.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 4, or the suggested minute associated with agenda item 7, approving the Universal Service Fund budget for fiscal year 2026 as proposed by the Universal Service Fund Council and set forth in attachment A to Commission staff's memorandum, and approving assessment of up to the full USF budget appropriation amount.
I move we approve the notice of investigation associated with agenda item 2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move we approve the notices of proceeding associated with agenda items 3 through 5.
Second.
Just to be clear, the motion was for items 3 through 5. We have a second from Commissioner Hawkins. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And in docket 5 UF 2025, I move we approve the proposed fiscal year 2026 budget and assessment amount pursuant to the Commission Secretary's description.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. That brings us to our loan discussion item of the day. It's number 6, 5 EI 163, which is an investigation on the Commission's own motion to review aggregation of retail customers to form demand response load reduction resources. First, I'm going to begin our discussion with a brief recap of how we got to where we are today. It's a long and winding road. So approximately 16 years ago, in 2008 and 2009 respectively, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, issued orders 719 and 719A, authorizing third-party aggregators of retail customers, ARCs, to participate in wholesale regional markets for retail customers of large utilities, unless prohibited by the relevant state regulatory authority, which in this case is us, the Commission, which MISO refers to as a RERA. So in other words, under those orders, RERAs were allowed to prohibit or opt out retail customers' demand response from being bid into wholesale markets by ARCs. In response to those FERC orders, on October 14th, 2009, this commission issued an order in docket 5 UI 116 that temporarily prohibited ARCs in Wisconsin. In the order, the reasoning for the prohibition was to prevent potential unlawful discrimination and to give the commission additional time to gather more information about ARCs and related MISO tariff provisions, which at that time FERC had not yet approved. Most other MISO states prohibited ARCs around the same time that Wisconsin did. On October 21st, 2010, FERC approved MISO's tariff update for ARC participation. In February of 2021, a legal challenge to the Commission's 2009 order was commenced in Circuit Court, and in April 2022, that petition was dismissed by the Circuit Court. However, in June 2022, the Circuit Court decision was appealed, and in May 2024, the Court of Appeals issued a decision finding the Commission's 2009 order invalid. Therefore, it's important to note that presently, ARC participation is not prohibited in Wisconsin. On September 5th, 2024, the PSC opened this investigation to examine the potential operation of ARCs in Wisconsin and issued a request for comments to help determine what, if any, priority actions the Commission should take on this topic. A number of parties participated in this process. Substantive comments were received, data requests were issued, and Commission staff put together a memo summarizing this topic, the relevant issues, comments received, and potential next steps. That memo was also put out for comment, and altogether, or in the aggregate, all of this information comprises the record before us today. First, I do want to say that I really appreciate the work put in by Commission staff, especially Laura Whitling and the parties that participated in the investigation to help inform our decisions. The topic, the entities, programs, the interplay, and the impacts of this issue are complex, and I think our staff have really done an admirable job with this. As I mentioned, this investigation is the product of a court decision overturning a prior commission order prohibiting the participation of ARCs. And again, important to note that because of that court order, ARC participation is not currently prohibited in Wisconsin. And I think this is notable, especially in light of the fact that this investigation was not necessarily initiated with the express intent to direct future actions on demand response, and that further, as evidenced by some decision points in the memo and supported by some stakeholder feedback received, we are not, as a commission, compelled or obligated to actually do anything today. Okay, next I'm just going to talk a little bit about existing utility demand response programs in Wisconsin, which are separate from the ARC issue before us. So I think it's important to state up front that demand response is an absolutely important aspect of utility operations. It's one of the many tools in the tool shed that collectively can help address the capacity needs of utilities and operations, and is an essential component to the all-of-the-above approach that we take not only to a generation resource diversification, but also in developing multifaceted solutions for meeting load growth challenges, affordability issues, grid reliability issues, and others. Well-crafted demand response programs provide customers with incentives to reduce their energy usage during peak periods. These programs can support reliability, and they can create financial savings for electric providers and customers. Currently, Wisconsin utilities offer two main types of demand response programs: direct load control, which gives utilities the direct control of customer equipment for the purpose of adjusting load, and interruptible tariffs, under which customers, typically commercial and industrial, receive lower rates in exchange for allowing the utility to interrupt load during critical periods. Furthermore, and for all of our YouTube followers who can attest to this, this commission specifically is supportive of demand response efforts. For recent examples, in the WEC electric utilities rate cases that we took up in late 2024, we approved demand response pilot programs and even expanded the scale of the programs beyond what the utilities initially requested. Additionally, in our Oak Creek combustion turbine docket that we took up in May of this year, the three of us agreed to direct the applicant to provide analysis of comprehensive demand response programs capable of providing significant capacity, thus recognizing the important role demand response can have in addressing capacity needs. A different element of demand response, which is the third-party aggregation of retail customer resources, is the subject of this investigation. So to be clear again, existing utility demand response programs are ongoing in Wisconsin, and I feel that those offerings need to be preserved and not negated by our actions today. Yes, there's absolutely interplay, especially double counting concerns between ARCs and utility demand response programs, but I think our discussion today needs to focus, and our decision today needs to focus on those third-party aggregators specifically. Again, those third-party aggregators can participate in MISO wholesale regional markets on behalf of retail customers of Wisconsin load-serving entities that have distributed over 4 million megawatt hours of energy in the previous year and are rate regulated by the commission. This means in Wisconsin that there are 4 utilities that meet these criteria. For all other Wisconsin utilities that the commission regulates rates, ARCs currently cannot independently operate in their service territory. On this point, I want to say up front that I do not support expanding ARC participation beyond the 4 utilities currently included, for reasons I'll discuss a bit later and as stated in the WIPI comments to the staff memo. ARC participation within the 4 utility service territories is relatively new, and as noted in our memo, MISO has an ARC registration process in place which requires utilities to notify RERAs when an ARC registers demand response customers. The primary takeaway here is that there is a functional process already in place, and our memo offers a few alternatives for us to consider today on what we want to do on that issue moving forward. So again, there is a lot to talk about here. This is a really complex issue. It can be confusing at times, and I think it's important again for us to really focus on what we want to do today as a commission about these ARC participants. So I'm going to tee up my positions and kind of walk through the alternatives and some of the pros and cons for each to help lay out kind of where I am, and then I'll kick it to my colleagues to provide their views on those decision options. Okay, so I think again, I want to restate that I don't support expanding ARC participation beyond the 4 that are already included. This That position would preserve the status quo for smaller utilities. Smaller utilities can and do offer utility demand response programs to their customers. I think that expanding this ARC participation at this point would be unduly burdensome on small utilities, which was also acknowledged by the FERC orders. The FERC orders did not apply to small utilities and did highlight concerns about cost coordination and wholesale market participation and subjecting an entity like a small utility to a process that it doesn't currently participate in. I think it's very reasonable to take a different approach to smaller utilities. And again, our commission does not need to take action today to continue protecting small utilities and customers from the burdens and challenges of this, because right now, our participation does not include the smaller utilities in Wisconsin. Okay, now to discuss my thoughts on the alternatives presented in the memo. Alternative 1 and an alternative 5 that was proposed by the joint utilities comments, which in this case would direct further investigation into the participation of ARCs in demand response with future rulemaking if needed to solidify the ARC landscape in Wisconsin prior to 2029, when a whole nother FERC order 2222 regarding distributed energy resources, similar but not the same, is likely going into effect. So set that aside for now. I think that those alternatives, so 1 and 5, are the most measured and reasonable positions the commission can and should take today. Again, as noted in the memo, taking no action today would not prevent utilities from submitting future ARC tariff program proposals on a case-by-case basis when they're ready, which to me means our bases are covered and no additional action is required at this time, which is consistent with alternative 1. I'm not strongly convinced that there's an actual problem that needs to be solved or that the commission needs to issue a specific directive today. Our historic concerns, as stated in the memo with ARCs, have been largely resolved by court order, the lifting of the prohibition, et cetera, and this issue is relatively new and not yet ripe. I also agree with the comments that the additional data and experience is needed to ensure efficient, coherent, and successful implementation of ARCs in Wisconsin, which would again kind of fall under Alt 5. I think this investigation provided a lot of very, very helpful information, but I think there are still unanswered questions that could or should have been included in this stage if we're going to take affirmative action today. And I do think that all of the parties involved, as evidenced by the widely varying positions that the commenters took on the alternatives, would benefit from additional investigation that could include pilots, working groups, collaboration between the ARCs and the large utilities, et cetera. And I think it's possible that that timing of this could dovetail nicely with the future FERC Order 2222 guidance and compliance on that related distributed energy resources topic. With that being said, I do want to add that I'm somewhat flexible here and could absolutely find a way to get to alternatives 2 and 4 with modifications. So alternative 2, which would not direct the 4 utilities to submit new or updated demand response tariffs on how they plan to work with ARCs, but would require that any future ARC-related filing include some or all of the above listed components. So there are 3 major kind of issues or concerns that were highlighted in the memo. The first one is, there's in no particular order. One is double counting to make sure that participation on the MISO level is not also being counted through a utility demand response program. The second is the sharing of data. So one critical component of all of this is data sharing. And, we have administrative rules about this. We have, a very robust discussion of data sharing concerns in the comments and in the memo. And so that's something that I think would need to be included in any future filing. And then the third is ensuring that non-participating customers are not negatively affected or discriminated against due to their non-participation. So those 3 issues are at least a minimum of the 3 important topics that would need to be considered in a future filing. But again, I'm comfortable with alternative 2 and including those components if that's kind of where we need to end up without, again, directing that to occur. But if and when the utilities are ready, that would be a filing that they could put forward. And again, it would need to at least cover those important above listed components from our memo. This alternative, I think, preserves, it's similar to a lot of my reasoning for L1. So there isn't a problem that actually needs to be solved today, and we don't necessarily have to issue a specific directive. It doesn't prevent utilities from submitting future tariff program proposals on a case-by-case basis when they're ready. And it provides flexibility to develop those things and learn more about how the program, how this participation is happening through on the MISO level before, to help inform those filings if the utilities feel that those filings are necessary. Now, in terms of cons to that position, if there are issues with our participation that do need to be addressed through tariffs, again, we could order it when we could, but, it could impact the timing a little bit. Again, I could also find a path to get to alternative 4, which a number of the commenters seem to kind of coalesce around. So alternative 4 in our memo would direct commission staff to prepare a scoping memo for potential rule related to third-party ARCs and then return that to the commission. So the pros of a rulemaking process would be that it is appropriate for the commission in its role as a RERA and the regulator to undertake this type of rulemaking, and again, would be consistent with court decisions. As the regulator, I think we would appropriately retain some level of control over the process. If no temporary prohibition is ordered as part of our decision today, then the current MISO process could continue during the rulemaking. So it would not take that existing option off the table. I think as we've seen in the memo and in the comments, that there are other issues related to this topic that do require further investigation, and that this rulemaking process would allow that to happen. So those things could be further studied, investigated, considered, and then potentially included in the rulemaking. Again, with that looming FERC Order 2022 compliance, it's possible that the study and investigation for the rulemaking and the rulemaking itself could align and conceive of that complex issue to help, because we're also, as a commission, probably going to have to do something about that as well. That being said, if we as a commission decide to go the rulemaking route, I'm more comfortable with a modified alternative 4 that would say, based on the information gathered thus far, that we would direct commission staff to solicit additional feedback from interested parties on the viability of and potential scope for an administrative rule about third-party ARCs, just to make sure that we have that scope information and guidance. And then we would, as a commission, then, put together a scoping statement that would kick off that rulemaking process. So I will say then that leaves my least preferred alternative, which I'm most concerned about, which is alternative 3. My reasoning for this is that, first, I don't like the idea of directing utilities to do something before it's ripe. I think that it could lead to prematurely initiating tariff filings that don't allow sufficient time for the commission and for utilities to apply learnings from the current new ARC process and to gather additional data that could help inform these filings. I think, again, one of the things that we've seen as a process, as a result of this investigation, is that there is unanswered questions remain, challenges remain, and it's not clear that acting fast and directing tariffs under a certain timeline is going to help with that. In fact, it could exacerbate those issues. I further have some issues with the timing options offered in the sub-alternatives. I think sub-alt A, which would require that issuance to happen within 1 year which would require the filings to happen within 1 year of the issuance of this order, is too soon, and the rigid timeline, again, would exclude learnings and potentially lead to hastily put together tariffs that could then result in further capacity and development issues, not only for the staff, our staff, but for the utilities as well. Sub-alt B would require applications to be filed by the end of 2026. This is better, but it's also too soon. Page 28 of the memo does talk about that the commission could consider a longer deadline to create potential alignment with other upcoming rate-making processes and require large utilities to file by the end of 2026. So if, as a very less preferred option, we end up at an alt 3 here, I would go one step further and require utilities to file these by the end of 2028. I think that could take care of a lot of the issues that I just stated above. And it would better align actually with upcoming rate-making processes. So super quickly, we're on a 2-year rate case schedule. The 4 utilities that are included in ARCs right now don't file in the same years. So bumping this to 2028 could help get us through the rate proceedings that are filed this year that will be taken up this year that will affect 26 and 27. And it would also help take care of the filings that will occur in 2026 to cover 27 and 28. And again, gives all of us more time to gather information, learn as much as possible, and then file more informed and better crafted tariffs. So again, modifying that timeline and adding some of those components is the only way that I would even consider supporting alternative 3, to affirmatively direct the utilities to file tariffs on this. Again, I think if any tariffs are going to be filed or directed, I want to ensure that at least the components issued or listed in the memo 1 through 3, so those double counting, non-participating customer protections, and data sharing components would need to be included in any tariff that is filed or that is directed to be filed. I know this is a long journey, but those are my positions right now. But again, I know that both my colleagues have a lot of experience and knowledge on various aspects of this issue and the docket before us. And so I'm very curious to hear their thoughts on this. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that we can arrive at some sort of positive position to kind of craft our next steps and our path forward on this issue in our state. So thank you for bearing with me during that, and I will turn it over to Commissioner Nieto.
Thanks, Chair Strand. Excuse me. That was really helpful, and I appreciate your opening remarks. And I agree. I think we can get to a good place today, and we have a number of available options here. So I'll say a couple of things. Like you said at the outset, and as was stated in our memo, demand response programs provide financial savings for electric providers and customers. They support reliability, and they provide customers with incentives to reduce energy usage during peak periods. We are in this time, and again, this is echoing some of what you said, Chair Strand, of apparently skyrocketing demand growth on top of increasing capital costs, longer lead times for the equipment needed to construct power plants, and ever-increasing upward pressure on customer bills. So expanding our state's demand response capacity is essential. At the utility level, demand response should play a significant role in a responsible, affordable, and efficient resource mix. And as Chair Strand said, we have the utility level demand response discussion, and we have the aggregator discussion, which is what we're focusing on here. So at the aggregated level, as the memo points out, other states do lead Wisconsin in demand response capacity, and we have an opportunity here to reverse some of those trends and take next steps to encourage, lead, and facilitate expanded demand response capacity together with Wisconsin's utilities, customers, stakeholders, and with aggregators and with MISO. I would also echo your thanks to the staff team who did excellent work on this memo, and to all of the commenters who provided incredibly helpful comments. And again, to some of your point, the range of options selected in the comments is also somewhat indicative of the openness and the number of pathways we have in front of us here. So with that, I came down to number one preference, alternative 2. For many of the reasons you already voiced, it essentially encompasses alternative 1. It allows the activity under alternative 1 at the MISO level to continue to move forward. It doesn't require utilities to come in by a date certain with tariff proposals, but it does create that additional encouragement by way of offering parameters for those utilities to work with. It also recognizes that some utilities in our state might be in different places than others in terms of how far along they might be with ideas for potential proposals around aggregators. And this option also doesn't necessarily preclude rulemaking at the same time or at a later time once we learn more lessons. So Alt 2 was my preferred, and I was at Alt 2 with the 3 parameters that are provided in our memo and that you discussed. I would have slight modifications to those parameters, essentially on number 1 on the protecting non-participating customers and looking at admin costs. I would simply add the words admin costs and savings associated with ARC participation. So taking that holistic look at the cost benefit. And on number 3, I would reword it proposed practices for proper sharing of customer data. And that would encompass more of the collaboration on data sharing as well as the customer data protection as discussed in our comments. And with those 3 things here, I think staff has done a good job in doing great research and identifying some of the gaps and some of the areas where we still need to learn lessons. And this gives utilities who are ready to file or become ready to file some items to work around and some previously teed up items that we'll be looking for. And this can still encourage further demand response capacity in our state. It can allow the current process that's already open to continue to proceed, and it can also address some of the concerns around the data sharing, the admin costs, and those fair play types of concerns that we've seen echoed throughout various comments and various positions. After that, I would be at Alt 4 for a second choice. And a lot of that is for the reasons you listed as well. And if we do end up at Alt 4, I would be fine with your modification that you expressed under that as well. And then after that, I'd likely be at an Alt 1. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that very articulate statement about your position and the very helpful modifications. So I can absolutely join you there, and I just want to restate to make sure that we're on the same page before we could get to Commissioner Hawkins of kind of like what's on the table as like the most preferred option at this point. So it would be an alternative 2, which would read, do not direct NSPW, WEBCO, WPNL, or WPSC to submit new or updated demand response tariffs regarding how they plan to work with ARCs, but require that any future, here's our first modification, ARC-related filing include all of the above listed components 1 through 3, consistent with the Commission's discussion. And so those 3 things would be analysis of potential administrative costs and savings associated with ARC participation and proposed measures to protect non-participating customers, proposed communication practices that will take place between ARCs and the utility and the method used for any double counting checks, and proposed practices of proper sharing of customer data to ensure customers have given informed consent, or do you just want to leave it as proposed practices of proper sharing of customer data?
I would leave it at that
Okay.
and strike the informed consent.
Perfect. So then the third component would be, the third required component of that future filing would be proposed practices of proper sharing of customer data. Okay, great. Thank you again. Commissioner Hawkins, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Strand, and thank you to both of you. I agree largely with what I've heard from both of my colleagues and appreciate the detailed and clear background on the issue and all of the reasons for why it's important that we evaluate this issue and sort of the changing landscape. I think at a high level, just sort of opening comment-wise, I just want to stress that there is value in the price transparency that ARCs can provide. I know that's something we've experienced in our other dockets when contemplating what to do with demand response, and you mentioned our recent decisions on that. And so I think ARC participation in wholesale markets can be beneficial to the decisions that we make at the Commission by having that sort of price transparency and understanding the value of those resources at the wholesale level. So I just wanted to state that at a high level. I agree with both of my colleagues. There's also a very important affordability element with demand response. And so new avenues or additional pathways for demand response can certainly help support greater levels of affordability. And I also want to say that the consumer protection concerns that were present when the temporary ban was issued in 2008, I think a lot of those concerns have been addressed by really important changes at the wholesale level, and MISO sort of acting with its stakeholders and members to improve its registration processes and put greater protections in place at the wholesale level. So I'm encouraged, and I think it's in alignment with what Chair Strand was saying as far as we haven't had any sort of issues demonstrated to us with ARC participation as it exists today in Wisconsin. And so I'm comforted by the changes that have been made at the wholesale level. So that's just a bit of the background as to where I'm coming from on this matter. I will get to my position now. I am in a similar place to Commissioner Nieto on preference for alternative 2, again with modifications. I agree with Chair Strand that I don't think we need to compel anything here, and so I really like this option where if a utility feels the need, they want to come forward, they certainly could. I think there's some important expectations or criteria that we should place on those filings, and so I'll just speak through those now. The first one actually was very similar to what Commissioner Nieto just mentioned, the modification to number 1. I had a bit broader of a take, and instead of savings, I thought it would make sense to say analysis of costs and benefits of ARC participation within their territory. I think the benefits piece can get to other concepts like flexibility and reliability, and it's broader than just savings. And so I think that's pretty similar to what Commissioner Nieto put forward, but that's what my suggestion for modification would be for number 1. Then the discussion on number 3 related to proper data sharing, I had actually split into 2 different requirements for a future filing, and I'll just explain why that is. But there was a lot of conversation in comments that we received about communication practices between ARCs and utilities, and there was also a lot of discussion on the sharing of data. And so those I think are 2 different things. One of them is more operational in nature, and one of them is more related to like registration and settlement of resources. And so I would suggest splitting those proposed communication practices with aggregators and the practices or whatever language was just arrived at between the 2 of you to safeguard customer data as 2 separate items. And so that would basically set the expectation on the communication practices for the utilities to explain in their filing how they would be communicating with ARCs that are participating through retail programs, and then also ARCs that are participating at the wholesale level as 2 different types of aggregators. And so I think having the filing explain both for data sharing and communication, how do you treat your aggregations in utility programs? How do you treat third-party ARCs? And in their filings, explain those 2 things to us so that we can see the similarities and differences there, if there are any. And so a key piece of what I'm hoping to accomplish there is to set the expectation that we want to understand how our utilities are working with ARCs that are directly accessing the wholesale market, and also set the expectation that we are not expecting our utilities to prohibit third-party aggregators from participating in the market. by setting that expectation there. So I was supportive of the double counting check method and just wanted to split that third item there. But I'll pause and see if there's any questions. I know I'm kind of explaining a lot and there's nothing written down before you on that. So hopefully I can clarify or state it better if there's any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. Let's tackle your modification to 1 first, just to make sure we're on the same page with that, and then we can talk about the others, if that's okay with you. So I believe that with your modification and in light of what Commissioner Nieto and I discussed, that the first component would read analysis of potential administrative costs and benefits of ARC participation in the service territory, in your service territory, and propose measures to protect non-participating customers. And that your intent there is that it's a very holistic cost-benefit analysis that also conceives of the other benefits or other, ancillary benefits, direct benefits, et cetera, that are potentially realized through ARC participation. Is that an accurate capture of your position on number 1 with modifications?
It is.
Okay, so it would be costs and benefits, and if some of the benefits are not fully quantifiable, they still would need to be discussed, correct? As part of that analysis under number 1?
That's right.
Okay. Commissioner Nieto, are you comfortable with that kind of slightly further modification of first component?
Yep, I'm okay with expanding it
Okay.
to benefits.
Okay. Legal, do we need to restate that, or are you comfortable with where we are on that first component?
So are we just replacing savings with benefits in that first condition?
I think it would be analysis of potential administrative costs. Let me
And
read my notes.
benefits.
And benefits of ARC participation in their service territory and propose measures to protect non-participating customers. Yes? Is everyone okay with that for 1?
I am.
Works for me.
Okay, perfect. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay. Now, moving along, I want to take 2 separately just to make sure, I think we're all in the same place, that the second component, which is proposed communication practices that will take place between ARCs and the utility and the method used for any double counting checks. I hear what Commissioner Hawkins is saying about communication practices, but I think for the purposes of double counting and it seems a unanimous comfort level with number 2 that we can leave number 2 as is, if you guys are comfortable with that, and then we'll move on to 3.
I'm good with 2 as is.
Okay. Commissioner Hawkins?
Yes, that's fine.
Do you
I
want-
just
yeah, go
noted
ahead.
one other.
Nope.
One other thing that was mentioned by a couple stakeholders or a couple of the commenters was that, and it's a concern of mine that the double counting and the communication practices might benefit from a centralized at the MISO level registry. And so one of those things that I think would be helpful for us to see in number 2 is how a uniform or a centralized communication platform enables that, basically reduces administrative costs or helps prevent double counting. So basically the idea that all of our utilities devising their own processes and their own systems could get complicated and expensive, perhaps, and that was brought up by a couple of the commenters. So in number 2 here, when they're bringing us their proposed communication practices, could they also speak to, what a centralized platform or how they leverage the wholesale tools to do that? I think setting that expectation could help with that. So I don't know if it needs to be spelled out because this is kind of high level, but I just wanted to get that across as something that I thought was important here for number 2.
Yep. I appreciate your comments on that. So, okay, so number 2 does relate to communication practices between the ARCs and the utility, and then specifically spells out the method used for double counting checks. So I think I'm okay leaving this as is, but I think if we wanted to have number 2 focus specifically on communication practices between ARCs and utilities, and then not kind of complicate that aspect of number 3, perhaps number 2 could read, spitballing here, propose communication practices, including but not limited to the method for any double counting checks and the investigation or consideration of what did you call it?
It's like a centralized
The
registry
centralized registry,
or a,
thank you, or the available platform or software that will take place between ARCs and the utility. So again, this is really about having the future filing include some information regarding communication practices between ARCs and the utility, and we for sure want that to include information about double counting methods, but also potentially have them at least consider what you're saying about this centralized registry. How are we on that?
Right.
Commissioner Nieto?
I agree with what you're saying, and Commissioner Hawkins, I agree with the benefits of asking utilities to come in and speak to the centralized platform. And I think, Chair Strand, to the first option you mentioned, keeping this language as is, I think can accomplish that. And as Commissioner Hawkins said, whether it's in our order, discussion, or what have
Yep.
you, everybody knows that we're interested in hearing
Perfect.
The benefits of that centralized platform and the cost savings that it might provide for utilities.
Okay. Okay, so I think we are at a position then to keep number 2 about the proposed communication practices as is, and obviously that would also need to include the method for double counting, but we have said out loud and set the expectation of what some of those other communication practices, what other information related to that we would like to see in a future filing. Good?
I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you, guys. Okay, now on 3, my preference here is to have 3 then specifically refer to, this data sharing and protection of customer data similar to the same as the modification to 3 that Commissioner Nieto and I are comfortable with. So that would again be that the future filing would have to include information about proposed practices of proper sharing of customer data. Commissioner Hawkins, can you join us there, given the fact that we have kind of tackled the communication preferences in number 2, or sorry, communication practices in number 2?
Yes, that's fine.
Commissioner
I
Nieto,
think-
go ahead. Sorry, 1 second. Commissioner Nieto.
Oh, thank you. Yep, I think sticking with that high-level language still works for me, and I appreciated Commissioner Hawkins' more granular discussion and breakdown of what that would include. And I think that if you're both okay with it, I think that higher level wording can include that. It's both about protecting the customer's personally identifying information in a way that utilities are required to do it. And it's also about establishing a process by which all parties interacting in the system can, in a streamlined way, access the data and exchange information and kind of that fair way. And what that process will be would be outlined under 3
Yep.
in that high level, if
Yep.
that's what you both are envisioning as well.
Yeah, I think 3 is flexible and all-encompassing, and again, we've now said out loud some of the things that we are expecting 3 to include in a future filing. And I prefer to, like you said, kind of leave it in that more broad, high-level statement in terms of a component of what we would expect to see in a future filing. Commissioner Hawkins, are you okay with that as well?
Potentially, I think just one thing I want to throw out there for both 2 and 3, the proposed communication practices and the proposed the practices to safeguard customer data. I would like it to be clearly stated that we want the utilities to explain those practices for ARCs that are participating through utility programs and ARCs that are participating directly at the wholesale. So basically, 2 and 3, as you just laid them out, with a sentence at the end that states, clearly define how this looks for ARCs participating at the utility and ARCs that are participating at wholesale, or something like that, just so we can have a clear expectation that we want to see how it's being worked for both scenarios. Yeah.
And you are wanting that both scenario expansion to apply to the proposed communication practices and the customer, or the protection of customer data?
Yes.
Commissioner Nieto?
That makes sense to me too, and I do think we haven't really discussed rulemaking, but I think if we're ever heading toward a rulemaking in our state, that type of information would give us the lessons learned that we'd be looking for before we get to that point. So I think it's valuable to include.
Okay. Legal, do you need clarification on how to include both scenarios? Or are we comfortable with Commissioner Hawkins and how we can work that language in to 2 and 3?
Comfortable with that. Just want to clarify that 3, we're keeping it at proposed practices for proper sharing of customer data without the reference to, without the expanded language referring to informed consent.
Without that confirmed consent language,
Yep.
yes. But again,
And then-
I think with Commissioner Hawkins'
Yep, the
desire to,
refinements.
yes.
So regarding inclusion of information, ARCs participating in utility programs and at the wholesale level, both for 2 and 3.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Commissioner Hawkins? Does
Yep,
that capture
that
what you're
works for me.
seeking? Okay, Commissioner Nieto?
Yep, that sounds good to me.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Does legal, or does anyone else have anything else that they want us to restate or visit prior to the motion? Because I think we're ready for a motion.
Nothing for me.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you both. And again, thank you to everyone who participated. I think this is one of those really complex issues that we actually have had a lot of really good work on and compromise and a path forward and all these things. So this is exciting, and I really appreciate everyone's participation to get us to this point. So we are ready for a motion on this item. Commissioner Nieto.
In docket 5 EI 163, I move we advance the investigation pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That does conclude our official business for today. Our next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, August 28th, 2025 at 10:30 a.m. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we stand adjourned until Thursday, August 28, 2025 at 10:30 a.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.